it's one of the biggest barriers we have at Thistle Farms is people say like, oh my gosh, I love what you do. You know, I'm so inspired by what you do. And then they go buy their soap at Target. And it's like, just buy our soap. You know, you use soap. It's a reusable, awesome product. And we do have skin, but it's this barrier where men don't think they have skin or something. I don't know what it is. But I need to learn how to really branch out into men's bath and body care products in a different way. It's true though, like if you're a woman, it's like you get invited to women's conferences, you get invited to a bunch of women's things. So it's fun to be in a room and talk to men and women about peace and justice and think about our lives together and how we can do more effective and better work. I was aware when we were all on the conference call planning this that this was going to be a very elite group of pastors and scholars, and that what I want to make sure we have enough time just to have conversation about some of maybe an idea that gets sparked by anything that I say. I started out, I'm an Episcopal priest. I started out wanting to help women come off the streets, like all of us have these passions and these ideas. So the first thing we did is we bought a house in 1997, and it was going to be just a house to house 5 women and just say, we're done with all the systems, all of the injustices in this world, and just house women and just say, this is a sanctuary. And I do believe the best thing we can do on our healing work is to offer the time and space for people to do their own work. That we can offer the space and the time so you can do whatever work you need to be doing in the world of your healing. And that means your journey to wholeness kind of thing. So we opened up the house, and it was about 4 years into it, and it was like, this is crazy. The women are doing like Olympic work, doing great work in restoration and recovery, in forgiveness, in life and love, and they're still dirt poor. And you know that the systematic violence and vulnerability of poverty does more damage than, continual damage, continual trauma in people's lives. And that's when I thought, well, then I'll just use that divinity school degree and start a bath and body care company. And I really think that's where King went with his beloved community. We all know when we've done the reading that we went from civil rights to economic justice. That you have to make that move at some point, that when we're talking about peace, we have to be concerned about people's economic well-being. That if we're inviting women to come off the streets and out of jail and putting them in halfway houses and saying, okay, it's $125 a week, we know you've been on the streets since you were 14 years old, that we're asking them to hustle to get the money. And as long as people are hustling, then there's not that sense of well-being and peace, and that people are going to continue to be, as Preston was saying, strung out. That was going to be continually the pattern. So we thought, make something that was about healing for the body. 100% of the women that I have worked with in the last 20 years have been raped. And so we're talking about thinking about something that was nurturing and healing for the body, and that we could do this, that we could, and really, it's when I started thinking about that I really was born in the whole world of the beloved community. My little spot was where arts and crafts and justice come together. It's a very small place, but it's a beautiful place for me to think about ways that we can work together and be together. And it's really an old school model. I mean, there's a reason that women knit and sew in circles. There's a reason we go down to the river together to do our clothing, that something beautiful happens in a circle. And so when I started out, I knew I wanted it to be a circle. That when you're thinking about peace, and everything we do in the community is about non-authoritative models. If you have a history of child abuse, especially sexual trauma, authority is one of the worst triggers. So everything was going to be like this sewing bee or this circle. I know that Forrest was talking a lot about sewing, and I think how we sew is really important too. That it's not just women individually sewing, we're sewing in a circle. So everything I learned really about this ability to get creative in our justice, not social justice, creative justice. I'm more interested in having that conversation about going into new places and calling people, like in music or in our worship when we get real creative, but also in our economic spheres, to get really creative, to get people thinking again differently. And it opens me up and it opens you up. But everything I almost really learned about running what you see around you, I learned at the thing called the bazaar. Have y'all ever been to a bazaar? Your mother's bazaar. And it's where basically there's some justice initiative we want to have. And we come together and we go, okay, well, let's have a bazaar. And we'll raise $1,000 for this event, this justice initiative. So we all go out and we spend $500 or $600 on raw materials. And then we go home and we spend about 20 hours making our craft. And then we come together and then we buy each other's stuff. And we think it is bizarre, right? It is bizarre. And you think, that is the most inefficient, unbelievable way of raising money I've ever seen. I could have just asked you for $1,000. Or we could have said to the church, just take the offering up on Sunday morning. Let's be done with it. And what I learned, though, was that it changes lives having a bazaar, being in that circle. Because what happens is I say, you made that sock? Uh-huh. That is unbelievable. It is so beautiful. I could never, ever do those stitches. Uh-huh. And she's like, oh my God, thank you. And then she goes, you made that vine wreath with the plastic flowers glued on it. I never would have thought about that. And I'm like, I know, I came up with that myself. And we leave and we become friends. I mean, that's what happened to us today. She's getting me on Rivalry Yarns so I can get new patterns. And then what we say is, next year I'm going to make socks like that. And let's come back together. I'm bringing 3 of my friends because they want to see these socks. And all of a sudden, our justice initiative, there's 10 more people involved. There's 4 or 5 years of coming together. Community's been built. People have engaged this issue, and you've done a lot more than raise $1,000. And Dorothy Day, when she started the Catholic worker community, talked about this extravagance in this work of charity alongside justice, that it is not a bad word. It's this blessedness that happens when we come together and do this extraordinary engagement in economics, and that we participate in the economy of love. If we want to be in the beloved community, we need to be participating in the economy of love. And in the economy of love, we realize you can have good business models. You can have profound impacts on politics and cultures. I do believe, because we didn't stay, and I didn't stay and preach about women's healing and health over and over again, and talk about, why global human trafficking and prostitution and sexual assault is awful, but started doing something creatively, that we engaged a world that we would not have been able to touch. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's still really hard work, and it's still really complicated. But I have learned, I think, especially again in this really amazing group of scholars and teachers and preachers, that there's 3 things that we can be doing I wanted to talk about today that would help us do this, participate in this economic freedom, this economy of love, this creative justice. First thing is, I think all of us need to do better at translation. There's you have to not speak, is it Girardinese? Girardinese, is that a word? Ease. You have to have Girardianese. That's the language. I mean, I'm just saying, I see it in churches and I see it in communities. And it's important as we discuss internally, but to be able to translate it into a wider world is critical.
Well, amen.
Thank you.
I've been saying that for a long time.
Good. And I think I see it like at Vanderbilt Divinity School. They'll post something for the public, And I can't even understand it. A theology engaged in the program, and it's like, what in the God's name are you saying? And especially if people are walking by, they are not engaged in it. It took me a long, long time, even in my work, to figure out, and I do not know it now. I still speak Episcopalianese very often. But like I was at the 700 Club last week.
All right.
Right?
All right.
And it's like, you got to speak your truth, but you have to be able to speak it in a language that people can hear. The week before that, I was speaking to the Muslim Women's Association of Texas. So in that week, 2-week period, I mean, there's a lot of places to go and to be able to say, what is a language that translates about peace and theology, that engages a community, that makes a movement? How do we do it in a way that is engaging? So when I came out of divinity school and we wanted to start, we made a few products, and I was like, look, I've been at divinity school. I don't really know much about anything, but I do know biblical characters. So I named all the bath and body care products after biblical characters, which I thought was awesome. I did, the lip balm was just called Moses Lip Balm, No More Desert Lips. Then it was, the flame of Penuel for the candle, Hannah's laughter for the lotion, the bath salts were Lot's wife. And I was like, I'm really going to capture this, the people. And this marketing group came in and they were like, okay, these are horrible. And I was like, I agree. I don't know who did it. Which is what you always need to do, is just deflect, right? That's the main thing in peacemaking. Teasing, y'all. So they said, the most important thing you're trying to communicate, what is the most important thing? It's made by the women of Thistle Farms. So to this day, when you bought that candle, it says candle. And the body lotion says body lotion. They took all the names off, and it's made by the women of Thistle Farms with Love Heals. And we realized once we put Love Heals on a candle, we can generate hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars back into survivors' pockets. That translation took me a long time to understand, but it was still a love language. It was still beloved community language, but it was really important. And I had to step out of the way to get there because I am so steeped in my own language of church. So being a translator, I think, is key if we want to be a part of economic freedom in people's lives, to engage the beloved community. The second thing is, I think, of all the things we can do, is we have to continue to strip it down. That I think a lot of us spent so long just beautifully receiving the gifts of education, but to strip that stuff away, layer by layer, and find out what's at our core that gives us passion that we can speak from our hearts about, is critical in a movement of peace and justice. So I know what I can speak about with energy. I know what I can speak about with some sense of purpose and understanding. And that makes a voice effective. That makes a voice believable. But it takes stripping away some of the things that make us sound really fancy and smarter than we really are sometimes. And that's not saying de-intellectualize, it's saying get to the core. And the best example that I really have is when I started in this work and I was meeting so many women. And I had great teachers at Vanderbilt Divinity School, at the seminary at Sewanee. I read everything written by Martin Luther King, read everything about the beloved community, knew where I wanted my heart to be and what I wanted it to be about. So we opened up the house, women were coming in and out, and there was a woman who was in state custody. She weighed about 85 pounds. She was chained to a bed and she had a feeding tube. And they called me and said, can you come help her? And I went in, and she was going to die before she was released. So I realized I wasn't coming in there to do a housing interview for her, but just to be there with her as she died. And she died a couple weeks later. And the state gave me her ashes in a cardboard box. There was no one that claimed her body. There were no mourners. There was nothing. And I was really nervous when I started to plan her service. And I was nervous for a lot of reasons. One was that, this was outside my understanding of, anything. And sometimes in all this work of justice, you know this in your own life, that you realize how big the issues are, how entrenched injustices are, or how inadequate you are. And I felt all of those things. And this is the reason people say the church probably shouldn't get involved with this stuff, or this is how these issues are so much bigger, you can't really make a dent in them, that, her life was over before we even really had a chance to fall in love properly. So I gathered 5 people around, and we had a service just with the cardboard box. We had no music, we had no liturgy. It was just us trying to say some nice words, and then we were going to go scatter her ashes. And I said, "The Lord be with you." And then we all started sobbing. And it was because in my work as a priest who has buried many, many people, I have never felt love that thick in my life. You could not cut through it with words. Everything was gone. Everything had been stripped away. And I was left with this profound sense of God's presence and love. And I thought, if this is some of the worst the world has to give, meaning you get born into poverty and systematic racism, and you have abusers early in your life, and that paints puts down a red carpet for you to hit the streets, and then we graduate you to prison as soon as you turn 17 years old, and then we make sure you get really a good addiction going and disease going, and then you die. In the end is you have no mourners with a cardboard box. If that's about the worst, and still there is such a love and a presence, I would gratefully do this work my whole life. I wouldn't want to have been in any other room. I still feel that way to this day. It's a profound experience to be stripped down and feel the truth in your life, and it happens for us again and again. As we keep doing this work, we're not always inspired. Sometimes we are overwhelmed. Sometimes it feels like you have a parole committee and 2/3 of the folks weren't saying what you wanted them to say. And it strips you down and it keeps you humble, but it's also where we learn about love. And I believe that with all my heart. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about was just tenacity in this peace and justice work, just the tenacity of it. So we translate it, we strip it down, and then we're tenacious. And that means that we do this work when we are, we're going through our own stuff in our personal lives, when we feel so happy, when it's snowing outside, when our internet's down, whatever. We keep doing it because when everybody said, it's Thistle Farms, we're farmers. And I know you're looking for the field still. I know some of y'all put on bug spray. I apologize that that wasn't clear. But the idea was, that truly our job as farmers is to water and weed. That's our job. We water and weed no matter what is happening. And that's the way we keep going. And I have these periods that are a little bit of I just like to think of them as little gray periods. My husband says he knows it's been a bad day when he comes home and I have a beer and I'm watching Law and Order. He's like, "Ooh, good fun day for you." But it's true that there's been, for all of us, sometimes we're way up on it and we're feeling really good about it, and sometimes it's heartbreaking. Given the, what's happening just in our country, it's heartbreaking. And One of the things that we do at Thistle Farms, so we have this place, but we also have 50 sister communities around the country. So we start with organizations and we help them start long-term free housing with no authority for women who are survivors. That's what we do. We have more than a couple hundred women on our waiting list. And so the idea of being able to send women to sister organizations and to share this beautiful joy and burden of this work of justice is important. We have 26 global partners. A lot of the stuff you saw out there is made with global partners, some of which we started those organizations, and some of them are just organizations that we support. Our first one was the group in Rwanda. It is the group of women who are all survivors of the genocide. Our partnership started in 2008, so about 10 years ago. So the bug spray is all Rwandan geranium oil, and it tests out better than any other of the all-natural bug sprays you'll find in the world. Men. But use bug spray, right? Yeah. That would be something you could buy for yourself. Oh my gosh, I just thought of that.
All right.
I'll buy it for you. But so that wasn't the point. The point was go around a lot, travel a lot, talk to groups, raise money for groups, get groups going, open up new houses, keep this justice work going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going, keep it going. And sometimes you're like, I'm kind of done. And I was out in Nebraska in November, and we were helping open a sister community there. It was from Trinity Episcopal Church, but it was a woman named Teresa Hauser who is amazing. She worked in Washington, D.C. She had a horrible sexual assault incident in her own life. She came back, and she really wanted to open something that was, again, offering the time and the space for women to find their work of healing. So, raise money for everywhere we go. Women survivors go with. They tell stories. You're going to hear some of those today. They go and they share their story. They help, give a lot of validity to some of the theories that we talk about in trauma informed therapy and how women do that work. And I was taking a woman named Sophia who, she, when she tells her story, explains that she was in a foster home. She left after the 6th grade. She was being horribly abused, and she never looked back. And so she was raised here in Nashville on the streets and in detention centers. And then we graduated her to prison at the age of 18. Several decades later, she came here. So she had never really flown. She's just gotten a promotion. I don't know if you saw her down there. She is the head of logistics. So anything you order online, it goes through Sophia and her team in the logistics part of this building. So it's a huge gift when people remember us and order. It's jobs pulling it off the internet, pulling it off the shelves, sending it out. It's a great gift. So Sophia was with me. We did all the work. I was like, I've never seen anything greater. Any of y'all from Omaha, Nebraska? Okay, so I can talk about it. This is a safe place for me. So it was awful. It was a beautiful community of people, beautiful project. Everything was gray. It was late November, and like the clouds gray, building gray, trees gray, road gray, my heart gray. I mean, just grayness. That's the only word I can think of. And we're getting ready to get back on the plane, and because Sophia had never flown before, she didn't understand that cardinal rule, like, you do not cross the armrest on a plane, right? Especially if somebody's in that awful space of like, I just want to be left alone, I want to go home, I'm done with this community and all this work. And what I realized is that she was not just leaning against me, but as she was pushing me out of the way completely, she was leaning out the window as we were climbing higher. And there was a supermoon, and it was full and stunning. And all the grayness was gone. And the moon was haloed beautifully. And the clouds underneath it, it was, on the top side, no longer gray, but had reds and purples in it. It was stunning. And she looked at me and she said, I know this sounds crazy, but I never thought about it before. that there was a sky above the clouds. She never thought about there being a sky above the grayness, that there was anything beyond that. She was raised here in this community, and she never had the chance to look up and contemplate the stars. And I was like, Sophia, I'm good for another 5 years. I'm in. I'm in and you're in, because as long as there's people who don't remember that there's a sky above the clouds, we need to stay in this work. That there's a lot more to do, and there's a lot of ways that we can engage creatively and effectively to move people, to participate in the bigger marketplaces, to bring more people in and engage people, to hone our voices, all of that. So the last place that I wanted to really start a brand new social enterprise was with the women that were fleeing Syria. And you talk about all the, the violence of war, and then just continue to multiply that as we are experiencing the violence that refugees are experiencing on unparalleled levels, more refugees than we've had since World War II. It was just horrific. And I was seeing that video of the women, the boats, and the women were coming across, and they had these life vests on, and they had their kids with them. And then they were just being let out on the island, and then they wrap them in blankets. And then it's something like now the average length of stay in a refugee camp is 17 years, that women are having babies and raising them in camps. That mostly people never immigrate, that they go back to their country decades later. The link between human trafficking and refugees is huge, and we have not made that argument well enough. And I think it's really important, and it's important to make that creative link for people. It's almost like if you can remember as far back, that when Bush was president, and they made the link between HIV and moms and babies. And then all of a sudden, all the evangelical churches got on board, and there was PEPFAR money, and billions went out for treatment. It was creative. It was the same argument and the same disease, but they had made a link that was important for people to be able to understand how this was part of their journey of faith and life. And it became, again, huge economic boon once they were able to make that translation and do that work. Not that that's the best thing to do, but I'm just saying to engage communities sometimes. So there's something like 12,000 young women missing from refugee camps that they cannot find. That there is a big link between human trafficking and refugees. And that is an important link in my mind. So anyway, thinking about it, and I was like, we should make something out of those vests and out of those blankets they get when they land, because sometimes that's all they have when they have little, maybe a few items of clothing. And so we spent some time trying to figure out how you could turn the life vests and the blankets into welcome mats. And that we would charge $100 for each welcome mat. And that what happens is, I was pointing to this, that $50 goes directly back to the women in the camp. There's 9 weavers, so 50 of the 100, it's on their phone. I'm not talking about a percentage of it. $50, it's like, click, here's your phone, here's a $50 payment for each mat. Then about 20, right at a little bit over $20 goes to, like I said, what happens when women get together in a circle and start weaving or sewing. They were like, what we really need are buses in this camp, so that everybody can get their kids to the dentist and doctor, just not just the 9 new women, that we need to figure out a way so we can get to markets and food and clothing. So we spend $20 just for renting a place in the camp and renting buses for transportation. The other 30 goes to the 2 shipping costs, because we have to ship them from Greece to here, and then we have to ship them from here to wherever people buy them around the country, because it's a free shipping over $30 at Thistle Farms. And then it goes into marketing and new materials, buying new looms. So it's an amazing product. When we started out, and I said, let's go into the refugee camp, and all the big big NGOs there said, no, you can't. You can't hire refugees, first of all. You can't pay refugees. And if you hire just 9 women refugees, Syrian refugees, you're going to have a riot in this camp. It's the Ritsona camp, and it's way overcrowded, way underserved, all of that. And when I got all that negative feedback, I knew I was on the right track. It was like, awesome, we're in. We're totally going. And it took something like 2 hours to hire the first 9 women. So many women wanted to, and the promise was, that women will train new women as the project grew. So then we had our year anniversary yesterday. So we've been doing it 1 year. But we haven't been making the mats that year. But let me just say that we have sold a little bit over $100,000 worth of mats. So that's more than $50,000 going directly back, not just in services or programs, but directly back into the women in the camp's pocket. 9 women were hired. So I told you about how long it takes to get refugees out of camps in general. So out of the 9 women, 5 have been relocated within 9 months of making the first mat. And do you know why, right? You had the money. Exactly, you had the money. When you have the money, you are freer, because they were able to hire attorneys, go to the, show up at the dates and get the paperwork done and have the necessary means and have the money to buy the ticket out and the whole thing. And those 5 women all trained new women to take their place. The mats have not slowed down at one time, and women are with their kids, by the way. Those are 5 women, all taking their children with them. And all of those women have been reunited with their spouses that had left years before in Syria. So again, it's that story of beloved community and tying it to the economics. So we made a quick video. It's just like a 4-minute video that Kristen, my lovely executive assistant that you're going to hear from later, is going to... It never works, just so y'all know. Oh, it is working. That's weird.